as we contemplate what we've heard here, please remain seated and either sing softly or hum Spirit of Life. A meander is a decorative border constructed from a continuous line which is shaped into a repeated motif. I think we're all familiar with the flat-lined meander called the Greek key or the Greek fret design. We also are probably familiar with the curvy meander that's known as the rolling curve or the rolling wave. Now, when an artist first begins to create a meander, that first line or two, it really doesn't look like it will ever amount to anything at all. But later in the process, the design reveals itself and the human eye finally grasps the sense in it and can revel in its intricate beauty. And the reason that I bring all of that up is because there are other meanders in life. One can take a meandering path, and one can have meandering thoughts. And we often do this simultaneously. We do both. And somewhere during this process which may appear like an aimless wander to some people, an insight may reveal itself, and the human heart grasps the sense of it and revels in its intricate beauty. So repeating Joseph Campbell, when you are on a journey and the end keeps getting further and further away, then you realize that the real end is the journey itself. This moment now is the heavenly moment. So, Scott, are you ready to meander?
Ready or not. Well, it's good to be back with you again today. Always a pleasure to be here at the Unitarian Church in town. And I would appreciate Cole putting up the pictures from the Hadrian Wall from off the internet. And can I throw you a wrinkle? Can you go back to the welcome slide? This wasn't part of my talk, but I couldn't help but bring it up when I saw that picture. That's the famous sycamore tree in Sycamore Gap along the Hadrian Wall. It's the most famous tree in all of the United Kingdom. And when I first started planning this trip back in the early 2020s and was going to make the trip on 2024, unfortunately, shortly before I got over there, you can't believe it, but two men in the dark of night went in with a chainsaw and they cut that tree down. And I mean, this tree is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you'd have to really walk a distance carrying that chainsaw to go and cut this tree down. So by the time I got there, of course, the tree was gone. But I guess you could say, if there is any good news, this famous tree, which, by the way, if you ever saw the movie Robin Hood with Kevin Costner, this tree is in that movie. That scene is in the movie. It was filmed partly there. But the stump, when I got there, little shoots were coming up from the stump. So the tree is starting to regrow. It'll never look like it did, but there will be a sycamore tree there, or many sycamore trees. Plus, when they cut the tree down, the UK Forestry Service went in and they took the seeds, and they're growing a lot of sycamore trees from the seeds of that tree, and they're planting them all over England. And an artist took the trunk of the tree and some of the main branches, and they made a beautiful sculpture, which is now at the Sill, which is a youth hostel and center along the trail. And if you go to the Sill, you can see the beautiful sculpture that was made from the sycamore gap tree. But I was very sorry not to be able to see the actual tree in its natural setting. Unfortunately, the two men were convicted in court, and I don't know, they're serving a sentence of some kind. But yes, unfortunately, that tree is no longer there. Okay, now we can go, Cole, back to the beginning of the slides that I had. And there's the quote from Durkheim, who actually I'd never heard of, but I looked him up on the internet, and he's a fascinating person. I'd like to read some more of his material. He fought in, I think it was World War I, but then he later on became a Zen master, as well as a psychologist, and he's written umpteen books that are still available on the internet. Well, after hiking the St. Cuthbert Trail a few years back, I decided that I'd walk the Hadrian Wall Trail, which is 84 miles. It goes from coast to coast across the neck of England. My friend Phil would go with me, although he wasn't going to do any of the hiking. Unfortunately, right before I left, a few months before, I ended up with a torn meniscus in my right knee, and I wondered if I'd be able to make the trip. In the end, in 2024, I hiked about 1/3 of the 84 miles before bailing out. I figured I would hike the rest of it after I had the arthroscopic surgery, but unfortunately, after I had the arthroscopic surgery, I developed a second meniscus tear in the same knee. But I still decided to try to stick to my plan and return the following year. And here are some meandering thoughts from a 2-year attempt to hike the 84-mile-long Hadrian Wall Trail. But before we get into some of those meandering thoughts, just a little brief history on the trail and the wall itself. The Emperor Hadrian came to power in Rome in 117 AD. He inherited a vast empire that stretched all the way from Great Britain all the way to Persia. It was an incredible empire, but as you would expect in an empire that large with all the different conquered people all around it, that they kept fighting war after war after war along the perimeter as people tried to break free of the Roman Empire. When he became emperor, he decided that he would not try to keep expanding the Roman Empire, but rather that he would consolidate the gains that they already had made. And as part of that, he ordered that a wall be built across the northern frontier of the Roman Empire in Great Britain, because they never were able to conquer the Picts and the Scots in the northern part of the island. And so they built this wall. The wall was estimated to be 12 to 15 feet high and 8 to 10 feet wide. 84 miles, built all without any kind of modern construction equipment, and built in a very short time, just a matter of 2 or 3 years, they were able to build that wall. It runs from Newcastle to the north, on the North Sea, to Carlisle, just west of Carlisle on the Irish Sea. And every Roman mile, they had a small mile fort, which would have a small garrison in it. So every mile, there were soldiers. And then there were larger forts placed strategically along the wall to reinforce if there was a larger invasion. They also dug a vallum, or a ditch, along the full length of the wall, which made it even harder to try to get through the wall. It's estimated at one time there were as many as 10,000 Roman troops along that wall. And the Romans remained in Britain until about 410 AD. Now, today, hardly anything remains of the wall or the forts, especially in the first third and the last third of the wall. The middle third, as you're going to see, there still are some remains there, which you've actually already seen some of them. The wall was a testimony to the power of Rome at that time and the amazing architectural and construction abilities that they had some 2,000 years ago almost. Well, this is the beginning or the ending of the trail, depending which direction you're going. I started on 2024 in Bowness on the Irish Sea, which is that little cubicle is the official start of the trail. And I walked the 10 or 12 miles to Carlisle that first day. The bridge is over the river there in Carlisle. The church is about halfway there in a small town along the way. And then you can see the ground is fairly level because you're starting on the coast and heading inland. And so it was pretty level. And so it wasn't really too bad for me to make that particular trip, because I had planned the hike, the whole thing, in 2024. I had the trip planned, I had the hotel reservations, the airline reservations, even got on the internet and found the bus schedule for the local buses to get around. And then, of course, as I said, I tore the meniscus. There wasn't time to have the arthroscopic surgery. I gave up playing tennis, which is how I got the meniscus tear in the first place. But I also decided that I'd try a few short hikes around here in some of the state parks nearby just to see if I could do it, and I could on fairly level ground. So I did 30 miles over that first few days, and then let's look at the next slide. The first day I walked from the coast to Carlisle. That's the well-known castle or fort in Carlisle that was built I think around the 15th century, something like that. And it was a beautiful scenic spot. The Carlisle Cathedral is the next slide. A beautiful old cathedral there, and it was wonderful. They have a terrific coffee shop, by the way, in Carlisle Cathedral. And it's a beautiful spot to have a cup of coffee and a scone on the way there. The next slide, the second day, I hiked from Carlisle to Lanarcast, and saw some llamas or alpacas on the way there, and then you get a view of the scenery that second day. Again, you can see it's pretty level for the most part. And then the next slide is Lanarcast Priory, and this main sanctuary is still intact, although you can see that some of the building has lost its roof, but there still was a functioning sanctuary there. And everywhere you go in England, if you've never been there, everywhere you go, there are ruined abbeys. A certain king named Henry VIII came along and wiped out all the abbeys and confiscated much of their property and wealth. And so everywhere you go in England, there are ruined abbeys. Then the next slide. On the third day, I hiked from Lanarcast to Greenhead, and that was one of the museums along the way there on the left. And then on that third day, I finally began to see something of the wall. The first 2 days, I didn't see a single stone, not a single stone. But on the third day, I started to see parts of the wall. And I got to Greenhead, and I looked in the distance. I could see the hills coming up. And my knee had acted up earlier in the day when I was trying to climb some stairs out on a riverbank. On the flat, I was okay. But anytime I had to climb anything, even a simple staircase, I was having trouble with the knee. So what would I do when I hit the hills? and the rocky ground too. The more I fretted about it, the more my doubts grew. It didn't help that it started to drizzle about that time. Now, earlier in that day, I had walked through a rainy patch, and it hadn't affected my mood at all. I just put my rain gear on and continued to walk, and it stopped raining, the sun came out, it was fine. But looking at those hills and the doubts that I had and the drizzle, my mood got a little bit darker. And Phil and I checked into the glamping pod that we were staying at, and a decision would have to be made. Would I or would I not continue the hike? And I decided not to press my luck. I bailed out of the hiking part of my trip with the intention of having the arthroscopic surgery when I got back, and then coming back the next year and finishing the rest of the hike. Well, there we go. So I came back in 2025 with my friend Phil. He came with me again, and as I said, he didn't do any of the hiking, didn't plan to. When I got back here, I had the arthroscopic surgery, but as I said, I almost immediately developed a second meniscus tear in the same knee. Now, I didn't want to have a second arthroscopic surgery because I'd already lost some cartilage and I didn't want to lose any more. But I went ahead and went back to the UK and thought, well, let's try it and see how we do. I went back a little more determined, you can imagine, this being the second attempt at it. And so I started on the other end at Newcastle and hiked 15 miles to a little town called Wylam. All along, pretty much along the River Tyne was my companion most of the way. And being near the coast, that end of the trail was also relatively flat, so no problem. The big question was, when I got to the hilly part in the center of the trail, the middle third, would I be able to hike it? And that was the big question, because I was back where I was the previous year with that doubt in my mind. But I resolved to give it a try because I knew I wasn't going to come back for a third year and try it again. You wouldn't know what you could do until you tried. So I caught a bus at Hexham and went to Mile Castle Inn and walked up a country road to the Caulfield Quarry and Trail. And this was a beautiful pond or small lake there at Caulfield Quarry. And you can see the morning started off kind of foggy. I took it pretty slow on the steep sections, but there were stretches of fairly level ground before I hit the next dip. And I did come to one fairly steep area with rocks and boulders, and I have to say that I didn't look very elegant going up that section because everybody else was kind of picking their way through the rocks and boulders up this steep, I swear it must have been a 40% incline. It was very steep. And so one little section there, I was actually on all fours because I was afraid my knee would give out and I'd fall over backwards and go right down the side of the hill. But I went on all fours on that little section, and I got up to the top where I wanted to get to. And happily, when I got up there, it was actually relatively level, at least for a little while. I looked ridiculous going up, but I made it. Sometimes where there's a will, there's a way. It may not be a very elegant way, but it's a way. And it was worth it in the end because I got to see some of the very best scenery on the entire trail. And I made it safe and sound to Housestead's Fort, caught the bus back to Hexham. As I say, sometimes you don't know what you can do until you actually try. You can see there how hilly it is in that section, but you can also see how beautiful it is. And this is what I didn't get to see in 2024 because I let my doubts get in the way. I could have hiked it in 2024 because I did it in 2025 with the torn meniscus, and I could have done it in 24, which has irritated me a little bit knowing that. But anyway, I got to enjoy that section of the trail, and it was worth every little twinge and pain that I had to get there. Now, the second thing that I was reminded of was don't be afraid to change your plans. Sometimes plan B can be just as good or maybe even better than plan A. In 2024, as I said, I bailed out of the hike at 30 miles, but it freed up a whole lot of extra time because I was hiking like 6 hours a day prior to that. Well, that freed up 6 hours that I had time to actually stop and see the museums along the way. And they had some absolutely wonderful museums with all that Roman history on full display. And you could also explore the forts that were along the trail. I wouldn't have had time to do that if I'd been doing the hiking. I also had time to spend a little more time with my friend Phil, and I wouldn't have had time to do that. So this next slide, this is Vindelandia, and you can see the remains of that Roman fort. The walls obviously aren't very high, but you can see how extensive and huge that fort was. And again, imagine 1900 years ago, the Romans garrisoning this fort along the way. And you can see down into, I'm trying to remember what this was in the corner. I don't think that's not the Roman baths. I don't remember what that is. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, okay. This slide up here in the upper right, those are the remains of the Roman baths. And they were incredible. They had it down near the river, which made sense because that's where the water drained out from the bath and it went down into the river. And that Roman bath was amazing. I mean, they had like hot and cold running water. They had a fire that they would build in the one section underneath a stone cistern, and that provided the hot water. They had a section where you could have a cold bath, a hot bath, an in-between temperature bath. I mean, these Romans knew what they were doing back then. I mean, it might have been 1900 years ago, but their technology was incredible for the time. What you're looking at there in the center slide is the bank vault for the fort. That's where the commander would have kept anything of importance, including the pay for all the soldiers when they would get it. Yeah, this next slide is, there's Phil and I up there in the upper left corner. We walked from Hexham to Corbridge, which is another area that had, you can't see it in the picture here, but it also had the remains of a Roman fort size of Vindelandia. It had a beautiful old church in the town, and again, the river. The two people over here in the lower right were from Switzerland. And one of the things I enjoyed on the trip was, one of the nice things about hiking a trail is that you keep bumping into the same people who are hiking the trail all the way along. And over a 3 or 4 day period, we kept bumping into this couple from Switzerland. So we had dinner with them for 2 nights in a row. We got to the town of Wylam, and the bed and breakfast, we checked in, and lo and behold, we didn't know they were going to be there, but this couple was checked into this tiny bed and breakfast, same as us. So we had supper together again. And we still stay in contact via email. Well, last year, I found out that Hexham had a horse race going on while we were there, and it was a picture postcard day, and I had planned to do hiking that day. It would have been a perfect day for hiking, but I have to say that when I heard that there was a horse race on, I thought I'd never been to one of those in England before, and that's as traditional as it gets. I'm going to pass on the hiking and change my plans, and we're going to the horse races. So we did, and you can see it was a gorgeous day. And one of the horses that was running in one of the heats was named Florida Boy, and I grew up in Florida. So I figured that was a sign from heaven that I needed to back that horse. So I went down and placed a 10-pound bet on the horse. And unfortunately, for the first whole half of the race, it was literally in last place. But by the halfway mark, it started to catch up. And it actually got within, I think it ended up in the top 3 horses of the race. So it went from last place to like second or third, and with me cheering it on as it was starting to catch up from last place. So I was glad to have given up the hiking that day. the previous day I'd seen that nice, beautiful, scenic, hilly section that was the main part I wanted to see. And when I found out about the horse race, I thought, I think Phil and I will just go to the horse race today. We'll skip the hiking. Sometimes plan B is as good or better than plan A. The third thing that I was reminded of is that we as human beings are inclined to ponder spiritual things. On one of the hikes, this was from heading back from Newcastle direction back towards the fort at Housesteads, and I came across the Temple of Mithras. The two pictures on the right are the Temple of Mithras. You can see it there. And there in the lower right, I'm standing in back of the altar. And it was kind of thought-provoking to be there in this ancient Temple of Mithras. And all along the trail, there were altars to various gods and deities, and there were temple remains like this one. And what fascinated me is that you can't see it in the picture here, but people were leaving coin offerings on the altar of the Temple of Mithras. So hikers were coming along and leaving coins on the altar as they hiked along. Now, religions come and go, but we're still moved by the awesome nature of the universe. We're still moved to ask religious questions like, why was I born? What's the meaning of life? Why do bad things happen to good people? How can I deal with the fact that sometimes I do things that I shouldn't do and other people do things they shouldn't do? It reminded me of the Apostle Paul when he was addressing the people in Athens, saying, I've walked around and examined your objects of worship. I even found an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. The Athenians wanted to cover all their spiritual bases. They worshiped the gods that they had names for, and they even worshiped the gods that they had no name for. So they had their bases covered. It reminded me also of a bumper sticker that I saw a few years back, and I don't like putting bumper stickers on my car. But if I found this bumper sticker, I would put it on my car. It said, God is bigger than any one religion. Now, that makes so much sense to me. God is bigger than any one religion. And I thought about that while I was standing in the remains of the Temple of Mithras. I placed a little coin on the altar before I left. The fourth lesson from Hadrian Wall is how the past provides the foundation for the present and for the future. As I said, the wall was 84 miles long, 12 to 15 feet high, 8 to 10 feet wide, made out of cut stone. And the whole first and last third of the trail, you see hardly a stone. Where did it all go? Well, the answer is it went into building the mansions and manor houses. It went into forts like the fort at Carlisle you saw earlier. It went into building the cathedrals. So the stones from that Temple of Mithras may have ended up here at the Hexham Cathedral. This crypt is underneath the main cathedral in Hexham. It was built about 675 AD. And I don't know, it's hard to see, but you can kind of see some lines in the ceiling on the stones. I don't know what it says in Latin, but it's a Latin inscription, and it came from one of the Roman ruins in the area, and it's built right into the crypt at Hexham Cathedral. So all that stone provided building material for future generations after they tore the wall down. That's what happened to it. And that makes me wonder about what in our society today are we going to build into the future? What's going to be torn down and rebuilt and repurposed and reused and built to meet the needs of the future? The wall was repurposed for new needs, and the present and the future is not created ex nihilo, out of nothing. All that makes me wonder, what are we doing today that will be built in the future? A quick and final thought. There's pleasure both in returning to the familiar, and there's pleasure in going to new places. Now, I debated whether or not to return to the UK and hike the Hadrian Wall that second year, 2025, because after all, there are a whole lot of other things to see in this world, and there's a whole lot of other things to see in Great Britain. They have trails everywhere over there. So I wondered about whether I should go back to the Hadrian Wall, or whether I should just go and start another hike on a different trail and see something new. Well, I decided to go back, and we flew into London and caught a train back to Newcastle. And Phil went with me again that second year. We stayed in the same hotel that we stayed in the previous year. And it was a pleasure to actually be able to walk around in the downtown area of Newcastle without the aid of a map or GPS. Been there the previous year, we remembered how to get around down there. We even went back to the same theater and saw Miss Saigon was playing at the Newcastle Theater, and that is a wonderful play. I had seen it when it first came out 30 or 40 years ago in Chicago, and now I was watching it in Newcastle. It's an amazing play. If you ever get a chance to see it, I'd recommend it. Very thought-provoking. Went to some of the same restaurants we went to that we'd gone to the previous year. In Hexham, we went to the same coffee shop that we'd been to the previous year, went to Hexham Cathedral, and went to Evensong worship service, just like we had the previous year. I always enjoy going to those. It's highly liturgical and wonderful choral music. The Brits really know how to do choral music. And it was wonderful to sit in the same cathedral and see that again. Let's go back to the previous one just quickly. There's the theater where we saw Miss Saigon. That's downtown Newcastle, the River Tyne. There are like 5 bridges over the river, and this is the 13th century castle in Newcastle there in the lower right. But it's also good, of course, to see new things. This next one has nothing to do with the Hadrian Wall. But on the second trip in 2025, when we were done with the Hadrian Wall, we went a little further south to the British Lake District. I had never been there before. I'd seen pictures of it. And so we got off the train station in Penrith and caught the bus to Keswick. And that's Lake Derwentwater near Keswick. And I swear it's got to be one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. And I was so glad to have a chance to see that last year. In fact, if there's a place I would want to go back to, I think that would be it. The British Lake District is absolutely gorgeous. We took a boat ride out onto the lake. The hills are amazing. We were there in October. You can see the fall colors were starting in, and it was absolutely gorgeous. So there's value in going to familiar places. There's also value in visiting new places and finding places of beauty in those places. Well, we'll go back to the original slide. So on this trip, I never did finish hiking the whole 84 miles of Hadrian's Wall. I never got to the end. But as Durkheim says, the end may keep getting further and further away, which in my case it certainly did with the 2 torn meniscuses. But you begin to realize that the real end is the journey itself. And now, whether you're in a familiar place or a place that's brand new, that is the heavenly moment.